It's a long way. David Stewart Burnett, 15052 of the 16th HLI. So I went out on the Monday night, and I went into the centre of Glasgow, and at the corner of Union Street and Argyle Street, I waited wondering what I should do. If you wanted to join the Navy, you had to go to Govan and you signed on there. But if you wanted to join the Army, then you had to go to St Andrew's Hall. And when I went up there, I was registered as 15052 Private D. Burnett. I come home to tell my mother and my two sisters, and there was a strange quietness descended on the house after that. Not another word was spoken.
Dear Mother and Father, I write you these few lines to let you know that I am well, and hope to find you the same. They were around on Monday taking names of those who were under the age of 19, so I gave mine. I heard it was for home service, but I don't know yet, as I haven't been told, but I hope it is the case.
I'm only going about my mother and my aunts and my uncles and that told me, because my father died when I was young, you know. But according to them, my father went into it was the Royal Flying Corps when he joined up.
Parkhead had the Beardmore Works, which supplied the big guns for the dreadnoughts in the Royal Navy, and also the Forged Steel Works as well, which would steel makes weaponry, makes kit for the army to go forward with. And that industry was ultimately what fueled the war effort as a whole.
I am very patriotic when it comes to country. I believe that soldiers fight wars and end wars. They don't start them. At the end of the day, we've got to back our soldiers. They didn't ask to start the war. It was the politicians that started them, and they've got to go and fight them or finish them.
Just came back home now for 13 and a half years in the army, in the Royal Tank Regiment. And the conflict that was happening in Kosovo was on, and it was a whole standoff between the British troops and the Russian troops. I was reading that on my lunch breaks and stuff, and I thought that seems quite fascinating. It's something that I'd like to get involved in.
People from all across the country, bank clerks, postal workers, people working in factories, dropped their whatever they were doing and joined up. And I think it was that common endeavour, and whatever we may think of the war now, certainly at the time, they all believed it was a cause worth fighting, fighting for. Was they joined up in millions of men.
You got whole streets joining up in the First War, and they all went, and they all served together. Most of them didn't come back.
I remember speaking to David one day, and I says to him, David, I says, how could you have done it? I'd done it for my king, and I'd done it for my country, and because my pals went.
He went, well, it's for freedom for youth. That's how we do it.
It was frightening, to be honest. The whole idea of war was frightening at first, because it's the unknown into it. It's you don't know what you're getting yourself into. You don't know what's going to be happening.
We got 14 full months training as a soldier before I went out. So I went out there and marched from Boulogne up in easy stages to the front line.
The worst thing would be being away from your friends and family. Definitely, that'd be the worst. That's the hardest part.
Dear Mother and Father, you told me to tell you what kind of place it is. Well, it is 10 times worse than boredom was.
It wasn't common amongst them, but you did know the blokes that shook. He always touched you and held on to you. But they wanted to be ashamed of it. Because you knew, when your battalion went into the front line, that you weren't all coming out alive.
It was very much a man's world. Men worked in all the heavy industries. Women's work, if they worked, was maybe in domestic service or in nursing. And as all the men went off to war to serve in the armed forces or the navy or whatever it was, all these roles became vacant, and you would start to see women conductresses on the omnibuses, women working in administrative roles within the elements of the civil service, women near the front lines as nurses as well.
Everybody used to think, oh look, just let the men do certain jobs. The women never got to prove themselves, but when they went to war and women got to take the jobs, people started thinking, well, maybe we could give them jobs because they are powerful.
The 15th Battalion, the Glasgow tramways, they were all men who worked in the tramways. And when they signed up, they raised 1,100 men in 16 hours. That was probably the fastest recruited battalion in the history of British military history. So what they done was they recruited females to replace them.
And they would then take over the tasks that men were doing, that is creating the shell casings, filling the shell casings. These kind of things were dangerous kinds of work. Often women becoming infertile because of the exposure to chemicals.
And in particular in the East End, there was a lot of canning factories brought in, whereby especially widows of soldiers who were killed in the early years, they got jobs to work in canning factories, to put food in and everything else, because we had to provide our own food to send over to the soldiers in the trenches and everything else.
But the home front was every bit as important, because for the soldiers to actual fight in the trenches, they required the munitions to do so, and that took phenomenal sacrifice from the home front to do that.
Many women started to work in driving the cars or being corps conductors, and others became active in all sorts of things like being coalmen, special police women patrolling the streets, lamp-lighters. So it was a sort of emancipation of the women as well. So a lot of women worked in Parkhead Forge and gained access to a lot of money as well. Exciting times, I suppose, if you were a female.
Just a few lines to let you know I'm well, and hoping to find you all the same. Sorry I haven't written sooner, only I'm in the trenches. I have not got much time. We are getting very bad weather down here.
Trenches were pure filth, and they were filthy. They couldn't get a right bath, bathe themselves down. Sometimes they wished it heavy rain to take off all their things and get all the rain all through their body and their hair.
We relieved the 51st Division, and the mud was over our knees. Mud and water, and we were only sheltered in, just little shelters. And we were 4 days in the trench, and we were 4 days out. But the days we were out, and the nights we were out, we were carrying stuff up to the front line. We were never idle.
Under the illusion, it would have been a lot harder for the guys back in the First World War. With the heat, the exhaustion that you're under, carrying all your kit on your back, and the heat, trying to get through, it's exhausting. Physically and mentally, because mentally you need to stay alert.
And I remember him saying one night, it was near Christmas, he was sitting talking to my ma, and we were sitting at the table, and he says, he said, there was a row of Germans, only 10 minutes for us. So some of his pals had walked over, and they were all ready for them, and so was the Germans ready for them. But this one German walked out to them and said, put up a stick on it, a wee bit white duster or something. He says, it was just because it's near Christmas, he said, we're all doing the same things. He says, we've got parents and all, brothers and sisters. Parents waiting us getting back. We don't know whether we're getting back or no. He says, so this is one night we're not going to fight. One of the Germans, he's been the head one, he says, we're sitting with our wee candles, and they had 2 that they weren't using. And they come over, and they're all ready with, just in case, you know what I mean? He says, and they gave us the 2 candles to light and pray that the war will soon be over and we'll be back home with our parents, our brothers and sisters. That was the last I seen of them.
My last memory with David and talking to him, and I was amazed at his attitude, was I'd says to him, David, 1st of July 1916, 7:30, when the barrage lifted and everybody else charged at 7:30, they were already in no man's land. And by the time the Germans had realised what was happening, the 15th Battalion, the 16th Battalion, 17th were on top of them.
There's been days where you've been on tour, you've been out, and you don't think you're going to make it back. There's no way of describing that. There's no way of explaining how you get kind of emotional and welled up in that. You don't think we're getting back out of this.
I don't know which the Commander-in-Chief should have done, but he made one mistake. He flooded the trenches till they were as near as we are. They were a prime target. And one battalion, I'll not tell you which it was in assembly trenches. And we were just swept down with a machine gun, the shrapnel, the high explosives, the bombs. So I had 300 yards and more to crawl back to our front line. When I got to the first line of defence, there wasn't a body had a head on it. Now, when I tell you that there wasn't a body that had a head on it, you'll not believe it. In that battalion that was in the assembly trench, there was never a person come out alive.
One of his best mates was killed, but quite a lot was killed at that time, you know what I mean? But he just says it was a disaster.
It happens, with death it happens, I don't know how, definitely a higher risk if you get deployed somewhere that you might get injured or die, but it's a risk you take, isn't it?
He get wounded, he gets shot in the side of the head, he gets shot in the side of the leg, and he jumped into a sort of mortar, a shell hole, and he found this young boy in it, and the young boy was screaming, obviously shell shock. David had got a hold of him and calmed him down. He says, but by this time, about 9:30 in the morning, it was just all total massacre, people lying about, blown to bits, screaming, everything else, men running about, wounded.
I heard sad news. I heard the 2nd Battalion was cut up. I was wondering if Willie was one of them. I think he will be.
I've got friends that have been killed, I've got friends that are, you know, like paralysed, disabled, lost limb.
There was this German sniper and he was picking off dying and wounded soldiers, and he thought, nah, I'm going to get him. He says, so I looked around, got a rifle, focused on him. He says he couldn't see, I wasn't in his direct line of fire. He says, now just focused on him, let him come up, let him go down, let him come up, and then about the 3rd time he come up, bang, I got him.
You might send word if it is true about James McClay being dead, as I heard it was the case. Right soon, and don't forget, kisses for wee Joseph.
Boys went off to war and many didn't come back.
And I got down to the advanced dressing station, and they took my putty off and cut my trouser leg. And when I saw the blood, I felt faint, so they put my head down. I came to again when I was on a stretcher, and who do you think was pushing the buggy? 4 German prisoners. Now, one of the nicest looking young fellow, about my own age, looked at me in a most pathetic look. He must have said, I'm sorry, son. And I looked at him and I thought to myself, my God, is this what we're fighting? Now, that young man was just doing what I was doing, fighting for his king and country. And I made up my mind that war is the most ridiculous thing. Mankind will never learn their lesson.
I think we would have seen women going into factories, exposed to a whole world of work that wasn't they were used to before, maybe getting maimed, injured or even dying in the course of their work, undertaking different roles.
I used to lie sometimes in the hospital and say to myself, and think of that man. I never regretted shooting him, but I started to picture the scene in his house when word was broken to his family that that boy was dead. Because my brother was killed the week before I was wounded, and I know what it was in our family.
You need to have that mentality that if somebody's shooting at you, you need to shoot them to stop them from killing you.
Dear mother, tell my father that David Anderson from Branchy was wounded. I'm in a bit of misfortune just now, so I cannot write sooner, but I expect to be home and leave shortly, if all goes well.
I know my dad was in the Royal Artillery. He didn't have anything in his ears and they got busted. So he got a pension out out the army. But after the war he sold it because they had no money. My ma had it hard here, so she had to go and take a job. So he was at the front and he was in the Somme, he was in Ypres, whatever. And when he came back, my ma says he was a changed man. He turned to the drink, and by God, when he was on the drink, it was hell. We used to hide in the big press in the lobby, and my ma taken that for years, up till he died.
I have lost friends in the army that, through other circumstances, like, you know, committed suicides, and it's heartbreaking.
When he came back, he had to walk about in crutches for a couple of days and then put the leg on. He was always in pain. That's how they took him into Erskine for to get wee operations and things like that. But I mind him sitting one night and just sitting on the table and that, and I mind him saying, got up and he was, so I says to my mum, what's the matter? She went, no, your dad's all right, he's just going into the room to sit. But he's been in pain because it was a stump, you know, it was just a stump. Great to get a bath. And to sit down at a table, a knife and fork. You know, it must have been great for some of the boys that did come back.
Disgraceful the way they treated people after they came back for the First World War.
And I think once the war completed and the men came back, women were then expected to go back to where they came from, which was back into the kitchens and into the domestic service that they'd been hitherto expected. And I don't think that was realistic. I think it would take another generation for that to really bed in. The world had changed forever and we weren't ever going to see the 1914 world again.
But the wars were all different then, you know what I mean? But at the end up, we won the war. The Germans lost.
People have to recognise that the things that we enjoy today, the freedom of speech, the welfare state, everything was fought for. These were results of the sacrifice made by our grandfathers and great-grandfathers and great-great-grandfathers during the conflict. It's important to remember why we've got these things.
Keep the home fires burning while your hearts are yearning.
I think war's bad because, like, all the stuff that can happen.
I think it's a bad thing because you shouldn't be fighting over other people's countries.
100 years on, people would think, no, it's an old war, but it's still relevant.
The greatest thing about the war to come out of it was the hope. When you look at the positive aspects of the war, and that was the poetry that came out of it, the humanity that came from it, people didn't forget their humanity, and it would have been very easy in those kind of conditions that they fought all across the world to forget what exactly it was they were fighting for.
First World War, futile, but it shaped the country as we know it, shaped the world as we know it. We don't know what had happened if all these lost generations of soldiers hadn't been killed. We don't know, we just don't know.
But me personally, I mean, I don't like any war. I mean, I wouldn't vote for it in any circumstances, unless it was absolutely necessary.
All the wars is just the same, you know what I mean? A lot of young boys get killed and different things.
And I started looking at the graves, and it's mostly Glasgow battalions, the Highland Light Infantry badge, the Elephant and Bugle. And I could realise with some of the names, when I saw them, I said, they're EastEnders, families which are still relevant to Parkhead and Bridgeton to this day. And once you start looking at the graves and you see their ages, you know, early 20s, late 19, I just get really upset and emotional. And
I mean, there's a lot of horror stories that you hear about the First War and the loss of life. You know, in the first battle of the Somme, there were 60,000 men killed in the one day. That was the first day of the Somme. I mean, that was both sides. I mean, the Germans lost as much, but it was just wholesale slaughter.
It was a terrible business.
Up to mighty London came an Irishman one day. As the streets are paved with gold, sure everyone was gay, singing songs of Piccadilly, Strand and Leicester Square.